Today, we're going to be looking at a 1966 Evinrude 9.5 horsepower Sportwin and seeing if we can get it back on the water. This is the after-work garage. I got the Evinrude up here. It looks like it's in the best shape of all of the motors. Just by looking at it, things seem to turn. The choke did not completely fall out of the motor. That's always a plus. It pulls. And it feels like there's compression. So I have high hopes for this guy. That's in neutral. Got our shift lever here. So this is promising. So let's take a look at it. Here we are. See if this just pulls off, and it does. Ugh. Sound dampening foam in there. We have a free turning flywheel here. Alright, I loosened these spark plugs for us. Again, you can tell a lot from spark plugs, but I'm not an expert. Though these look pretty new. Alright, let's look inside. So we're getting a look in the top cylinder here, with the exhaust ports there on the left and the intake ports being just uncovered on the right. There's some pretty heavy carbon buildup there on top of the piston, and the cylinder walls look like they've been polished to almost a mere finish by heavy use. But importantly, it doesn't look like there's any major scoring that you would see with an engine that's overheated, or rust, or parts that are broken off where they shouldn't be. So let's take a look in the bottom cylinder. This is a cross-flow two-stroke, so the exhaust gases are going to leave out the left there, and then the intake gases are going to come in from the right, which is why that piston has the funny shape it does on top. That's to try to direct the incoming air and fuel mixture up into the cylinder and help prevent it from escaping directly out into the exhaust. But cylinder 2 looks pretty similar, with nothing jumping out at me as warranting major concern. So I'm optimistic about this engine. It doesn't look too bad. I think it's actually going to run. So the next thing I'm going to do is check for spark. And to do that, I'm just going to turn it over with the spark plug in and ground it against something metal. So one problem with these older engines is that sometimes they can have problems with the coils underneath, and they can be really hard to find. So finding electrical components, if they're broken, can be a major problem. So let's give it a shot. So hopefully you can see that there's actually a spark. When I turn it over, there's a spark that jumps between the electrodes here, as it would in the engine when it's firing, which tells me that it's generating a spark. It's getting to the spark plugs, and what I was doing there, holding this against the engine block, is the negative in car engines and boat engines is going to be is the block. So in the spark plug, when it's screwed into the block, the ground is here, and the electrical impulse coming through the spark plug wire goes in the top here, and then it jumps from that middle part to the electrode, which is grounded to the block. So if you take it out and just touch the outside, you'll get a spark that jumps from the inner electrode to the outside. But be careful, because if you're not grounded very well and you're touching the metal, you can actually give yourself a pretty nasty shock there. So this is looking good. But before we take a look at the lower unit, I wanted to just take an opportunity to show you something. If you're trying to get your outboard to tilt up, and it just won't tilt up, and this isn't going to do it, nothing seems to be working. There's a pin that goes through here, and this sets your trim. And this is a feature on a lot of outboards. There's these hooks right here that are spring loaded, and they grasp this pin so the motor doesn't pull up when you're in reverse. So let's make sure the propeller spins freely here. Don't force. Sometimes you have to turn it a half a turn. So I've just put it in drive. What it's done is push these hooks off of the pin. So now the outboard will tilt up. Hey there, welcome to the lower part of the engine. First thing I'm going to do is see if there's any fluid left in here. Actually, the first thing I'm going to do is take the prop off. Normally there's a cotter pin that goes through this hole. It doesn't seem to have it, so, and it's finger tight. So normally you'd have to use a wrench. This actually, again, I'm not extremely familiar with outboards, but this looks like an older style where there's a pin that goes through this. I recognize this from trolling motors. Instead of the pressed in rubber fitting that's in more modern props. It's not splined, and so all of the force of the motor goes through this pin, and if you hit something really hard, instead of the motor breaking or you ruining the gears in here, the idea, I believe, is that this pin shears off, or inside here there's something that shears off. I think the pin, this is a shear pin. But anyways, interesting. Make sure to save this. Now, let's drain some oil. That's good news. There's oil in there. And actually, it looks pretty good. I'm guessing this is the fill, but I'm not totally sure. That's gotta be. Wow. Okay, so I lied. I found the oil fill level. It's up here. Alright, so let's fill it back up. So you're asking, what oil am I using? Well, I'm using what I have, which is Mercury Gear Lube SAE 90. Should work for now, at least. And there it comes, out top. Okay, so someone was probably yelling at me as I was undoing this screw on the other side. I honestly have no idea what that's for. So, if you know, let me know. A quick word on service manuals. They're great. And basically anyone you talk to who's working on a car, truck, boat motor, anything will tell you to get one, read through the section on the procedure you're thinking of doing, and then start. While I completely agree, I'm not always the best at following my own advice or the advice of others. So I was flipping through this service manual, looking at carburetor cleaning and disassembly. As you can see, I'm in the middle of that right now. And I was heading back to the appendix to look up some setting numbers for synchronization of the engine after I get it back together. And I stumbled upon lower unit maintenance. I've done this procedure. I've done it on this motor. And I've done it on a number of other motors. And generally, it's not that difficult. But remember when I was taking this motor apart and I said, I wonder what that screw's for. And then I thought, someone probably knows. Well, it turns out the service manual knows. And it says, the Phillips screw securing the shift fork in place is located very close to the vent screw. If the wrong screw is removed, bad news, very bad news. First of all, if they're going to put such a critical screw that requires you to disassemble the entire unit if it's taken out by accident, somewhere on the lower unit, they might want to put it somewhere not right next to a screw that's taken out all the time every time you service the lower unit oil. Second, I like how the service manual's only advice is bad news, very bad news. So we'll see when I get this back together and running if this is something that I'm going to have to deal with. Alright, let's take a look at the impeller, if there's still one left. So sometimes there's a shift linkage that's visible on the outside that you have to get undone, which is what I was looking for. For example, on this one, you would unscrew it there before taking the lower unit off. Here, it's not a very good view. You can see that screw there. There's two screws actually that go through and hold the shift linkage in place. Right in there. I like the spider webs. Alright, so here's the shift linkage that we were looking at earlier. And there was a little ball end right here that was clamped by that screw. We have our water pipe right here. And this is where the drive shaft goes up to the crankshaft. Our water pump sits right here. It looks like it's held on by 4 screws, here, 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 and here. I don't have a new kit for this thing, so I'm going to be really careful when I take it apart, if it's not shot, to try to be able to put it back together, at least to run it a little bit. Alright, so there's better ways to do this, but I have some ramps, and I'm just going to set it in there for now. Okay, so all told, doesn't look too good. This looks like it's been sitting a long time. See how these are bent and these are straight? Looks like someone had a relatively new impeller in here and then just left it, because the bent side was sitting up against here and the straight side was sitting up against there. In addition, let's talk about this housing. Looks like it's an aluminum housing and it looks pitted pretty badly. Corroded. But for right now, it's here. And hoping that these don't snap off when we start this guy up. We'll give it a try. There's the pin. Doesn't look, instead of a woodruff key, it looks like there's actually a pin there. Interesting. Okay, before I try to start this up, I'm going to take a quick look at the carburetor, which is right here. You have your choke, and that closes the butterfly valve right in there. Throttle. Opens and closes a valve inside there, or a butterfly valve. And the carburetor on this model, kind of odd. It's a slanted, diagonal looking thing that doesn't look like anything I'm familiar with, but I'm also not that familiar with carburetors. So this down here looks to be the drain nut for the bowl. And we're just going to take a quick look in there. I'm not sure, I doubt there's going to be any fuel in there, but I don't want to see a bunch of water. Looks pretty dry. So nothing came out. Don't really see anything on there. I think I read somewhere online when I was researching these motors that there's a jet behind this drain screw, so I'm not going to mess with this too much. As is, I'm going to hook it up, get a fuel line on here, and try to start it just to see where we are for a baseline. Wait, Andrew, are you going to pressure test that motor? Why, yes I am. Okay, I forgot, but it's a few days later and I got my pressure tester out of my truck. Not good. I mean, at least it's consistently bad. So the only marine gas tank that I have is being used for just straight gas, and it's hooked up to a 4-stroke engine. And these, by marine, I mean it has a fitting for a gas line coming out of it. So I went out and bought another one at Walmart, and I bought a gas line just because I didn't want to use 2-stroke oil and then have to switch it back or clean it out or something. Just a simple gas line with a squeezy bolt, and we're going to put this together, see how it works. So I bought the one that says that's Johnson and Evinrude OMC right there. So it should have the proper fitting for this motor, but just in case, I also bought fittings that supposedly go on Yamaha's, Mercury. Just because it's an older motor and I'm not totally sure if the fittings are compatible. Give us the highest chance of success possible. So this guy supposedly is a different clip design. So it doesn't have that several prong clip. I should have had my other one to show you. And instead uses just a little guy like this. That's already pre-Teflon taped, which is nice. So we're just going to screw this guy in. here. And it does. And it releases. I like that. Alright, so I'm outside. I'm going to mix up some 2-stroke gas. Nothing crazy here. I'm going to use about a 1 to 50 ratio mix. I know this tank has about 1 1/4 gallons in it because it's full. 1 gallon, 1 to 50 is 3 ounces. Ounces on the side here. And put it in until it gets down to about the 12 on the side. Alright, so we're safely set up in the kitty litter bucket here because it wouldn't fit in a normal one. And I'm just going to hook up the gas and see what we got. I'm going to have to probably prime it a bunch and then give it a bunch of pulls. Yes! Timing issue maybe. I don't know. It's running fine and then it seems to fire off cycle. And kills itself. So I'm guessing timing. We'll see. Okay, so apparently to set the timing on this, you have to just adjust the points. There's no other place to set the timing. Annoyingly, the walls of this socket are a little too thick. So we will be using a regular socket and hoping we can get this off. There we go. All right. The war begins. Let's talk about pullers. For some reason, no one wants to buy pullers to get the flywheels and things off because you never need them until you need them. Harmonic balancers and flywheels basically is all I can think of right now. So people end up hitting it to try to get it off or prying it to try to get off, and I'm totally guilty of this, but it's not great because what you'll end up doing is damaging the flywheel and probably still not getting it off. I've even gone so far as to make things like this that are homemade pullers, but for $20, this is absolutely worth it. Until you realize that all of the bolts, even the smallest threads, are too big for the holes. So you end up scrounging around your shop for little screws that do fit. Like these, which happen to be stainless steel, which is great. Except I dropped one down in here and I couldn't get it out because it's not magnetic. So I fished around with a long pokey thing for a long time until I could grab it with some forceps. So, back to the pulley. For the record, I would use an impact, but my neighbors are upstairs and I don't want to bother them. Okay, so let's see how this works. I'm going to put the flywheel nut back on. This is the thing that was originally on top of the flywheel, holding it down before we pulled it off. This way we can turn the crankshaft around, and watch the points, which are right here, close and open and close and open. And we're going to gap those to make sure they're gapped properly as they follow this cam on the crankshaft there. Okay, so we're going to gap the points now just to make sure there's the appropriate gap between them. And this side, I can slide a feeler gauge in there. There's just the slightest bit of drag. Then we'll ratchet it around. And we'll look at the other side. But it looks like they're not aligned perfectly. There. There's a better view. Oh, by the way, the spec for this is 020. Half a millimeter. So this plate is what rotates as you advance the throttle. What it does is it advances the spark, so it advances the timing because the motor is going faster. The spark needs to happen at an earlier point in the piston stroke. So what that does is the flywheel has this metal plate here that passes past these and generates a current, and that current is what passes down these high tension leads and causes the spark to happen. And as you advance the throttle, this whole plate moves, the spark happens faster because these coils, your coils are these things right here, encounter that metal plate sooner as it's rotating around.